support this bill, and because I think being from Samburu, where we are greatly affected by the encroachment,
that because of the presence of Savo East and
Standing Order 33.1 indicates that whenever during a session the Senate stands adjourned, whether or not a day has been appointed for the next meeting, the Speaker may, on the request of the Senate Majority Leader or the Senate Minority Leader, and in each case with the support of at least 15 senators, appoint a day for a special sitting of the Senate. So this particular threshold has been met, and that's why this day has been appointed for this particular sitting. Standing Order 33.2 indicates that the Speaker may allow a request under paragraph 1 if the Speaker is satisfied that the business proposed to be transacted relates to the matters specified under Standing Order 74. This is on a special motion, although this morning there is no motion about this particular bill. Standing Order 33, Section 3 indicates that the Speaker shall, by notice in the Gazette, notify the senators of the place, date, and time appointed for the special sitting of the Senate. So basically that is what exactly happened today, having been appointed as the day, as well as the time and the place where members will be meeting at the Senate chambers. Paragraph 4 indicates that where the proposed business to be transacted by the Senate requires the action of the National Assembly, the Speaker shall in writing notify the Speaker of the National Assembly of the date appointed for the special sitting. And 5 indicates that the Speaker shall specify the business to be transacted on the day or days appointed, and the business so specified shall be the only business before the Senate during the special sitting, following which the Senate shall stand adjourned until the day appointed in the Senate calendar. So the Climate Change Amendment Bill 2023, originating from the Senate, this was a message from the National Assembly for the senators to be able to consider, or rather for this particular bill to be able to be considered in both houses. And senators will also be considering a motion on the alteration of the Senate calendar for the second session. And remember, this is in accordance with the House Standing Order number 33, number 5. That is what I just read out to you, that whenever the Senate meets for a special sitting under paragraph 1, the Speaker shall specify the business. So in this case, there is the consideration of the Climate Change Amendment Bill, as well as the consideration of a motion on the alteration of the Senate calendar for the second session. The Climate Change Amendment Bill is a bill or seeks to amend the Climate Change Act 2016 to provide for the regulation of the carbon markets. The Climate Change 2016 is a national legislation intended to enhance response to climate change. And as you can see, the Speaker of the Senate, Honorable Amason Jeffakingi, has stepped into the chambers. He will be presiding over this special sitting. Allow me to hand you over to this live broadcast brought to you by PBU in partnership with KBC. Good morning.
Almighty God, we beseech you to behold with abundant favor and blessings us, your servants, whom you have been pleased to call to leadership positions in this republic. We seek guidance to treat and consider all matters that shall come under deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests you've committed to our church. Amen. Clerk, do we have quorum? Sergeant at Arms, kindly bring the quorum bell for 10 minutes.
Well, that is the quorum bell currently underway for members to be able to get into the chambers for the commencement of the House business. And in its business this morning, there is the notice of motion on the alteration of the Senate calendar. Remember, as I had indicated earlier, is that the Senate is on a 3-week recess that was to end on the 4th of September and resume on 5th. But on this motion that seeks to alter the calendar for this session is that the Senate will be seeking or moving this particular motion to have the calendar altered for them to be able to resume from this particular recess that they are currently on Tuesday, 12th September 2023. Earlier on, the calendar had indicated that they will be resuming on the 5th of September. But this one seeks to have the Senate agree on this motion that will be moved by the Senate Majority Leader, Honorable Aaron Cheriot, that the members continue to be on recess until the Tuesday of 12th September, the year 2023. If you're just joining us, is that this is a special sitting that is being live broadcasted from the Senate chambers. This is pursuant to Standing Order number 33-1 that touches on the special sitting, and that a day will be appointed for the members to be able to sit to consider a particular business or to have a particular business transacted. In today's special sitting is that there are 2 businesses set aside to be considered. The Climate Change Amendment Bill 2023 that is scheduled to be read for the second time on the floor of the Senate chambers and give room for the members to be able to ventilate on that particular bill, as well as the second business to be transacted is consideration of a motion to have the Senate calendar altered for the second session. But currently is a 10-minute quorum bell. This is pursuant to the House Standing Order number 40, that at the commencement of the business or at the commencement of the House, then there has to be a quorum of about 15 members in the chambers. And if not, then a quorum bell will be rung for 10 minutes. This is to give room to the members who may be within the precincts of Parliament, but yet to get to the chambers to be alerted that the House has begun and their presence in the chambers is highly required. So they make their way to the chambers as fast as possible. So for now, we will be seeing members walking into the chambers, but once the quorum is achieved, then the sergeant at arms will alert the clerk and the speaker will call the House to order. There you can see the Majority Leader, Honorable Aaron Cheriot, engaging one of the clerks there. And members will be getting into the chambers until the House has achieved its quorum. Therefore, the business can continue. If no quorum is present at the expiration of the 10 minutes, the Speaker may direct that the bell be rung for a further 10 minutes. And if there is still no quorum present at the lapse of the second round of the 10-minute quorum bell, then the Speaker shall adjourn the Senate forthwith to the next sitting. But we believe that the House will achieve its requisite quorum, having in mind that there was a Gazette notice that notified all the Senate members that there will be this special sitting at the Senate chambers, and that their presence is required to enable the House transact the business that has been set aside for this particular day.
Clerk, kindly proceed to call the first order.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair.
Senator Wafula and Senator Boni, kindly take a seat. What is your point of order, Senator Mandago?
Honorable Chair, is the Senator for Kajiado in order to just walk into the chamber as if he is walking to a cowshed? He must obey the rules of the House. Mr.
Senator Seki, proceed to the bar line and do what is necessary. Honorable Senators, I do welcome you to these special sittings of the Senate. The sittings are a follow-up to the one held on Tuesday, 29th August 2023, so as to conclude on urgent legislative business. On the request of the Senate Majority Leader, via a letter reference number SAN/ML/009/CO, dated 25th August 2023, and with the support of the requisite number of senators, I appointed today, Thursday, 31st August 2023, as a day for special sittings of the Senate, to begin at 9:30 a.m. and at 2:30 p.m. The appointment was made via Gazette Notice number 11580, dated 29th August 2023. In the Gazette Notice, I indicated that the business to be transacted at the special sittings shall be as follows. 1. Consideration of the Climate Change Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 42 of 2023, and 2. Consideration of a motion on the alteration of the Senate calendar for the second session. Honorable Senators, at the morning sitting, the Senate will consider the Climate Change Amendment Bill, National Bills number 42 of 2023 at the second reading stage. The Senate will also receive the report of the Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources on the bill, and a notice for alteration of the Senate calendar will be given. The business schedule for the afternoon sitting will be consideration of the said bill at the Committee of the Whole and third reading stages, as well as debate on the motion for the alteration of the Senate calendar. In accordance with the Standing Order 33.5, the business specified in the Gazette Notice referred to above and outlined in the order papers shall be the only business before the Senate during the special sittings, following which the Senate shall stand adjourned until the date specified in the Senate calendar. I thank you. Senators, you may walk in before I make the second communication. Honorable Senators, the inaugural African Climate Summit is scheduled to take place in Nairobi, Kenya, from the 4th to the 6th September 2023 at the Kenyatta International Convention Center. This event, monumental in its nature, is spearheaded by the government of Kenya through the efforts of His Excellency President William Ruto, PhD, CJH, and convened in partnership with the African Union Commission, the Global Center on Adaptation, and the African Development Bank. The summit represents an unparalleled opportunity for the African countries to address the challenges posed by climate change. The summit will explore the following 6 thematic areas that have been identified to combat climate change for tangible solutions and actions. 1. Climate finance. 2. Mitigation and green growth. 3. Climate adaptation and resilience. 4. Loss and damage. 5. Climate vulnerable groups. And 6. Research, innovation, and technology. Honorable Senators, during the Pan-African Parliament Summit on Climate Policy and Equity, which was held in Midrand, South Africa on the 17th May 2023, His Excellency President William Ruto emphasized on the need for an African Climate Summit that provides an opportunity to underscore and forge consensus on the modalities of unlocking Africa's vast potential to give a positive impact on the climate change agenda. Further, a summit that rallies the world to tap on the numerous opportunities that Africa presents towards global net zero carbon emission. The role of parliaments and parliamentarians in this pursuit cannot be overstated. Parliaments and parliamentarians play crucial legislative, oversight and budget making and approvals roles, which are essential in policy development and implementation and ensure government accountability and effectiveness. Parliaments also link vital knowledge with constituents, facilitating need-based and effective climate action. At the international level, legislators can work with their counterparts to build synergies and coordinated approaches at the negotiation stage for shared regional interests. Now, honorable senators, consequently, a parliamentary dialogue has been slated in the program of the African Climate Summit on Monday, 4th September 2023 from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. at the conference venue. Another full-day dialogue is scheduled on Wednesday, 6th September 2023 at the National Assembly Chamber. The two dialogues will bring together parliamentarians from across Africa to deliberate on the role of legislators in achieving the outcomes of the summit. The dialogue will culminate in a communique which will serve as a landmark document outlining the commitments of African legislatures to actionable climate governance. Honorable senators, I extend an invitation to all honorable senators to attend and participate in the parliamentary dialogue. Your attendance and contribution will signify the commitment of the Parliament of Kenya to taking decisive climate action. I thank you. Yes, Majority Leader.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Speaker, but I appreciate your communication. It's only missing in very critical information where the parliamentary directions for the parliamentary caucus meetings, whether it will be at KICC or here in Parliament, doesn't feature in your communication. And I think it's important it's made clear so that members who are planning to attend can know and move about easily.
Majority Leader, I had indicated that the parliamentary dialogue that is slated for Monday from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. shall be at the conference venue. And the full day parliamentary dialogue shall take place at the National Assembly Chamber. So those are the two events that will involve the legislators, and therefore senators are encouraged to attend those two sessions. One at the venue of the summit, that is at the KICC, and the one that is going to be a full-day dialogue will be done in the National Assembly Chamber. So kindly be guided accordingly. Next order.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion.
The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion. That is the alteration of the Senate calendar. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that notwithstanding the resolution of the Senate made on the 16th of February 2023, which is the approval of the Senate calendar on 29th of March 2023 and on the 27th of June 2023, alteration of the Senate calendar, pursuant to Standing Order number 32-4, the Senate resolves to further alter its calendar that is regular sessions, for the second session 2023 in respect of Part 5 to resume from recess on Tuesday, the 12th of September 2023.
Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements. Order number 8, the Climate Change Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 42 of 2023, second reading.
The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Climate Change Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 42 of 2023, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important gathering of the Senate today, this morning. Mr. Speaker, we are meeting here, gathered as a House, to consider this bill, the Climate Change Amendment Bill 2023, a bill that was published on 23rd, published under the Gazette Supplement number 127 of 2023, considered by the National Assembly and passed on the 23rd of August 2023. Thereafter, this bill was referred to us for consideration. Mr. Speaker, you are aware that this coming few days, the whole conversation across the continent of Africa is about climate and the climate change, and the conversation being altered in favor of no particular player, because, Mr. Speaker, we have been reminded on many conversations across this globe as the world continues to meet and gather in the COP meetings, that the global conversation is not just, the climate conversation rather, Mr. Speaker, sorry, is not about the global south or global north, but rather how do we convert and mitigate the negative effects of climate change so that we have a peaceful or a better climate for all of us on the globe. Mr. Speaker, it has been demonstrated ably that there are no winners and losers in this climate conversation. Many thought that the ravaging effects of climate change will perhaps be felt more in the global south than in the north. But the events of the last few years, Mr. Speaker, while we continue to battle things like drought and perhaps maybe other factors, Mr. Speaker, you have seen other more devastating effects actually in the global north as well. And this has led to the realization by every policy maker, every key decision maker on the globe, Mr. Speaker, that this is not an idle conversation, that this is not something you can afford to play the usual games of the world where people sit pretty. Those in the global north consider it to be a problem of the south, and those in the south imagine it to be a problem far too much. This bill makes an amendment to a bill that we passed in this House in 2016, the Climate Change Bill, Climate Change Act actually of 2016. This is just as the world was imagining that this is perhaps maybe a passing challenge, and therefore after the meeting in Paris of 2015, where many countries, Mr. Speaker, signed on to the Paris Agreement of 2015, therefore at the national level, each country tied on their own to either domesticate laws or find measures of mitigating this problem, and imagine that this is something that you quickly address and move on to the next challenge. Unfortunately, or fortunately rather, Mr. Speaker, the following years have taught the world a difficult lesson. People have realized that this is perhaps the greatest threat that continues to face this world, which if we are not serious as an inhabitants of the earth to combat the changes or the challenges that are faced in our climate, Mr. Speaker, and come up with policies and measures, think together, put our brains together, and have a concerted effort of combating climate change, Mr. Speaker, then in the next few years, this world may not even be habitable. And I guess subsequently, Mr. Speaker, That is why the conversations have moved and become better. If you are a keen follower of this climate conversation, Mr. Speaker, you'd see a different even in attitude, even in the attendance, even in the seriousness that is given to the global climate conversation, even in the subsequent summits from Glasgow up to the last one, Mr. Speaker, that was held here in Africa in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, Mr. Speaker, where participants now are beginning to live closer to reality and realize that talking and getting back to your jets and flying back home is not enough until there is deliberate effort at the local level, Mr. Speaker, is when we can begin to say that indeed there is something that we are doing about climate change and therefore mitigating or combating the effects and ensuring that we have a more predictable, more stable future as a people. And therefore, it is on this backdrop, Mr. Speaker, that we have actually come up with this particular bill. And I have seen, I know colleagues, senators have taken time to read through, understand, because this conversation, Mr. Speaker, is something that we live through daily in our lives. You know, Mr. Speaker, that immediately this administration came into office, realizing, because I think at the time when we just finished the last election, when this Senate was just being sworn in, this country was facing the worst drought that the nation had ever faced in the last 40 years. And you know very well that the people you represent in this house were faced with very serious effects of hunger. Those that come from the arid areas, people are losing their animals. Those that come from even the arable parts of the country, it was all dusty across the nation. And if you overflew the country, you would have noticed how yellow and dusty the country had become because of lack of rain. And those are just part of the effects. And therefore, this conversation began, and people began taking it seriously. In fact, when we said we need to invest and set resources, I think the figure has been put at close to 400 billion that is needed to not only just grow, and not only plant, but actually grow. And the difference has been defined, Mr. Speaker, that planting a tree is a ceremonial act that we do every time we are guest of honors in functions. I see many of you on weekends. You'd see Senator Manzo in Makueni Primary School invited. You just drop a tree, get your spade, and quickly wash your hands. Perhaps even sometimes forget to water it and move. That is what we were accustomed to. But like I have said, Mr. Speaker, we are slowly evolving and realizing the importance of this conversation, and that's why you have found we are being nurtured to appreciate and know that it's not just about planting a tree, but growing it, going back to check on it, Mr. Speaker, and ensuring that the tree that you plant, how is it doing? Mr. Speaker, you know, last week or the week before, when we had the Devolution Summit, they did something quite significant, and I appreciate, because each tree that was planted had a name by that particular tree. I remember the complaints of Senator Okiya Omtata, who is here, that when he got there early in the morning, he couldn't identify the tree that was set out. I don't know if he went to plant or somebody planted it for him, but I want to encourage him that each time, if he drives to Busia via Eldoret, stop by the, what is the name of that place you're planting mandago? I think the Arboretum in Eldoret, where we planted those trees, and check on the trees that you planted, because that is the act that you are being taught. It's not just about planting, but growing. Ensure, even the schools that you go to, and you're a chief guest, appoint somebody, ensure that the trees that you grow, because we are on a race for 15 billion trees to grow our forest cover over to 30%. That's one of the surest ways within which we can make sure that we mitigate the effects of climate change and live in a decent environment, have food security, and even overall improve the quality of life of where we live, be it here in Nairobi or back in our rural homes, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, like I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to amend the Climate Change Act, a bill that we passed here in 2016, and provide for a national legislation intended to enhance response to climate change and provide the mechanisms to measure and measures to achieve low-carbon climate resilient development. However, Mr. Speaker, you know, like I had laid the background, in 2016 when we were considering the bill, the world was just coming out of Paris And we were just all happy and thinking that if we went and passed on a quick law, this is the usual challenges that we face in our world. Somehow, somewhere, things will get organized and we will be out of this challenge. But I have said that the last 7, 8 years has taught us a very difficult lesson, all of us inhabitants of the world. And people have realized that if we don't take this conversation seriously, then we may not even have a planet to live on in the next few years. And the effects are visible. People can see and people appreciate and know what is happening across our world. And therefore, nationally, Mr. Speaker, you know, one of the challenges, if you read through the statutes of the Paris Agreement, I think it's statute number 25, Mr. Speaker, after all the hoggling, push and shove that comes with the global conversations, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the world was not able to agree because the world wanted a mechanism for measuring the mitigation measures that each country is going to put in form of policies in their own countries. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, because you know in this climate conversation, people still imagine that there are ways in which you can limit the development of other nations, or there is a way in which if you set certain policies, Mr. Speaker, you know, Mr. Speaker, everybody appreciates and nobody doesn't know that the leading polluters, unfortunately, wield the greatest powers on this globe. And therefore, it was not possible to set a global agency, Mr. Speaker, that will be able to monitor the ravaging effects of climate change and measure actually the policies that are being put in each and every country. And therefore, they came up with something, Mr. Speaker, in the Paris Agreement that's called the National Determined Contributions. That is goals that you set for yourself as a country and ensure that you measure yourself. Say Kenya now sets for itself a goal and say we want to do 30% less. For example, just to mention, Mr. Speaker, our own target as a country is to have a reduction of 32% by the year 2030. Takes a lot of money. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I know that our goal as a country is going to set us off $62 billion. And knowing where we are as a nation economically, I don't think we have that kind of money. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, not perhaps actually, rather, that is why we have this bill that is before us today, to try and find ways through which we can channel the contributions of the leading polluters to secure investment in our own country and have funds and resources come back to us as a nation so that we are able to meet our own quota of the national determined contributions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know for a fact, like I have mentioned, that carbon trading is one of the areas that has been identified and as a way and means through which developing nations such as Kenya and so many of those that are in the global south can use to raise resources to meet their contribution to this quota. I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that our own NDC puts us at $62 billion, Mr. Speaker, and we have only 7 years to go. If you put that money and left it for taxpayers to raise, the truth of the matter is that we will struggle to raise even 10% of that money, Mr. Speaker. But because of the bill that is before us, and this is why I want to challenge and ask our colleagues that let us consider this bill and put in place mechanisms through which we can attract investment and make sure that institutions and nations that are leading polluters are able, in a way that we can measure first as a country, identify and say that these are actual investments that are being put. Because one of the challenges that we are having in this carbon trade conversation, Mr. Speaker, is that if you go online, you will read very beautiful and rosy stories about what is happening in different parts of the world. In fact, I know for a fact that Kenya is a leading in this space on the continent of Africa, Mr. Speaker. There are counted no less than 116 projects that are going on in the country. But the biggest question that people continue to ask themselves is, where is this actual money? Where is this project? Where is it in Migori? Where is it in Kericho? Where is it in Siaya? That I can identify this particular project, and so that my own people who are making their contribution can know that maintaining a clean and a safer environment, that growing of these trees and part of the projects that are coming up because of the carbon trades that you engage in is actually beneficial to the host communities where these projects are being done. that is the amendment that is before us, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that you set in place the mechanism through which us as a country are able to measure and understand this space of carbon trading. Therefore, the regulation of carbon trading, Mr. Speaker, is crucial, not only to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also to promote sustainable development, attract investment, Mr. Speaker, fulfill our own international commitments that we have signed on, and fostering a green and resilient economy, something that we all aspire to and look up to as a country. Mr. Speaker, you would know for a fact that unfortunately, despite the fact that we have the greatest potential and that we are leading, the rest of the African nations are not sitting pretty on their laurels. Next door here in Tanzania, in the last 1 year alone, they have unlocked investment worth over $20 billion of green energy projects, thanks to the regulation of this space that I'm talking about. The reason why we continue to struggle as a country, Mr. Speaker, is because we don't have a regulatory framework for which we can measure. And that is a proposal that is being given in this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that a land-based project, for example, is being implemented through a particular community. And you think about any community in whichever part of the country, even to the farthest north, Marsabit, Turkana, or whichever part, that development agreement, a community development agreement, which shall outline the relationship and obligations of the proponents of the project in public and a community land where the project is being developed, and ensure that, Mr. Speaker, furtherance in the various clauses in the bill, clause number 3 to be particular, that the national government and the respective county government where this project is situated shall jointly oversee and monitor negotiations for the community development agreement with the project proponents and the stakeholders. And this is where it gets interesting, Mr. Speaker, because of this contribution or collaboration between the national government and our various respective county governments, Mr. Speaker, the principles or the lessons actually that we have learned where you measure and ensure that, you know, people, Mr. Speaker, we have been told from when we are young that they report either to the stick or the carrot, that either they are forced to do something or you motivate them. Therefore, the question that people have been asking is, what is my motivation? Why should I maintain a better environment? What reward do we get as a community, Mr. Speaker? Thanks to this NDC, the regulatory framework that we are passing, Mr. Speaker, it shall be possible for communities that maintain or are leading actually in this carbon credit market to ensure that they enjoy the biggest benefit. In fact, Senator Maruma, it will interest you to know that because of the presence of Savo East and Savo West, the people that you represent in this Senate stand to benefit the most because of the benefits of that particular clause that I've referred to, because of communities that host, the host communities will be the leading beneficiaries of these particular projects. And therefore, for the good work that you have done in maintaining Savo East and Savo West, commensurate projects worth of that are being attracted and directed to that particular region will be good motivation for your people to not only maintain Savo, but even grow trees and maintain a better environment so that they participate greatly in this carbon market. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, clause 2 of this bill seeks to amend section 2 of the Act, where you provide definition of the new terms that are being introduced. Like I had mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, that this is an ongoing conversation on the globe, that many people, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the time that, from the time that the world met in Paris, up to now, Mr. Speaker, clause 2 of the Act provides for the additional terms that have come, Mr. Speaker, which when we did the law back here in 2016, we had not thought significantly about it, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, it's just about definition of the new clauses. Clause 3, Mr. Speaker, of the bill seeks to amend 3A, Section 3 of the Act, and provide for one of the objects of the Act, which is what I've just referred to and spent a lot of time trying to explain, which is a legal framework on the international market mechanisms on carbon markets, Mr. Speaker. In that I've explained, Mr. Speaker, that while the rest of the countries that are competing with us have set in place this regulatory framework to be able to monitor and know what are the carbon trade projects that are going on in their country, we didn't have this legal framework, Mr. Speaker, and therefore that is a proposal that we are having here, so that monetary constraints, Mr. Speaker, and revenue generation that is coming, that continues to face us as a country, Mr. Speaker, when you try to participate and meet our own quota in the national determined contributions, Mr. Speaker, shall be a thing of the past. We shall be able to know this is the amount that a specific company has invested. And you know, there are many global companies, Mr. Speaker, that operate out of Kenya. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you will struggle to find any serious leading corporate entity globally, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't have operations in Kenya. For reasons that you all know, this is a large economy. Of course, this is a place that previously, I know we've had challenges previously, and quite a number of them have left, but many are beginning to troop back, Mr. Speaker, into the country. And therefore, this is where I want to draw the attention of my colleagues. While you find countries like, not countries, but companies like regulatory framework and the demand that you're making on these companies, in other countries, such as Tanzania next door, and that's why I've mentioned to the figures of what they've been able to unlock in the last 1 year alone, Mr. Speaker, they are able to put projects that are measurable, Mr. Speaker. But in Kenya, for the lack of this legal framework, they know you can easily get by and, you know, nobody will ask you any difficult questions. But that will be a thing of the past immediately we conclude on this bill today, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I want to urge the importance and the urgency of doing it, concluding on this particular bill today, so that when the world comes to Nairobi next week, when we have more than 30, that I address that point, Mr. Speaker, because I know many people have asked and said, Majority Leader, why were we not given additional time and all these things? While it is important to listen to those particular concerns, I think, Mr. Speaker, the importance and the significance of the first continental summit on ways and means through which Africa or the rest of the global south, Mr. Speaker, will stand to benefit in this space of carbon credits is happening here in Nairobi. We need to be under the proper regime of law, Mr. Speaker. It will be a great absurdity that the world will be here speaking about carbon credits, yet the host country itself will not have ratified or domesticated this particular law. And that is the essence of Clause 4 of the bill, Clause 3 of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Clause 4 of the bill seeks to amend Section 6 of the Act and insert a new paragraph to provide for the guidance and policy discretion on carbon markets to the national and county governments, the public, and other stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. I had mentioned, and this is an important place for you, us as the House that are defenders of devolution, Mr. Speaker, that it was important, without Clause 4 being included into the bill, without bringing county governments into this conversation, Mr. Speaker, then it would have been an idle venture, Mr. Speaker, because we know all these projects, they take place in our counties. All the mitigative measures, Mr. Speaker, of the action that we need to do as a people, they are done by people in the grassroots, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it will have been unfair for us to have a bill that doesn't bring the nexus of national and county governments, the public, and other stakeholders, as is being done under Clause 4. Clause 5 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 7 of the Act, which is to align and provide for membership of the Council that is being set up for better operations, as well as the same. Clause 10, 11, and 12, Mr. Speaker, I'll try and go quickly after. I'm alive, Mr. Speaker, to the fact of a kind of interest that this bill will generate, and perhaps members will want to speak about it, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I don't intend to take the full 1 hour, but I'll try and quickly rush so that maybe the rest will be said by the seconder, the chairperson of the committee, Mr. Speaker, of the additional things that probably I may have forgotten. During his time of seconding, he may mention perhaps some of the things that I easily could have forgotten or rushed over, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time. So I mentioned that Clause 10, 11, and 12 of the bill seeks to amend Section 15 and 16 of the Act to empower the Cabinet Secretary to make regulations as the Council's mandate is of a higher level of providing overarching policy and the National Climate Change Coordination Mechanism. There is an insertion of a new Part 5 which provides for regulation of carbon markets. This is very important, good people. I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that in this conversation on the climate issues that face the world, there is a lot of hypocrisy. I have mentioned further, Mr. Speaker, in my opening remarks that unfortunately the leading polluters, the people who are supposed to pay the most because they have gotten us fast where we are, unfortunately, wield a lot of power on this globe, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, because of the immense power that they wield, if you do not set it by regulation and ensure that you have a way through which the Cabinet Secretary is able to bring to our delegated legislation committees, Mr. Speaker, regulations frequently, so that if you have a particular project that is being introduced into the country, Mr. Speaker, you set up ways and means of monitoring and ensuring that those organizations, the corporations, anybody that wants to participate in the carbon market, Mr. Speaker, is monitored, and whatever they pledge, because people talk a lot, Mr. Speaker. I have mentioned that if you follow the conversations in Glasgow, and I think London thereafter, Mr. Speaker, it's only eventually the last 1 or 2 years, leading up to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt early this year, Mr. Speaker, that people have started being serious with each other and realizing that just coming, putting on your nice little suits, speaking on all the nice conversations about what needs to be done and retreating back to wait for the summit next year, is it going to get us to a better place? That people have become serious, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, even us, by way of regulations, Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that we have, first of all, people who, especially the institutions that will do the monitoring, Mr. Speaker. And I know I saw people present, Mr. Speaker. I think I happened to have caught on to the presentation while it was being made yesterday. And I saw part of the memorandum that had been sent, that there are Kenyans actually who are taking this conversation seriously, and they were saying, instead of giving it to the Ministry of Environment to be the regulator or the people that measure the practice of a carbon market, why don't you liberalize it and leave it to the private sector? In any case, it has been found to be more effective than government. I think that's a conclusion that we far reach as a country. And while I agree with them, Mr. Speaker, I think perhaps, and this is something which the importance of clause 10 and 11 and 12 on the powers that are being given to the Cabinet Secretary, while the overarching regulator of this space and market, Mr. Speaker, will remain to be the government of Kenya, I think it will be better if they license, and that is something which they can address when they eventually bring the regulations here, Mr. Speaker, provide the mechanism and the framework through which you can leave it to the private sector, people who have the competence of measuring this carbon market and who have been part and parcel of this conversation far longer than many of our officials say at the ministry level, so that we ensure that nobody takes advantage of us as a country, Mr. Speaker. Because if you're not careful, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, people will come here and will set up organizations, and like we know, just like happens in the NGO world, Mr. Speaker, people quote huge figures in the global capitals, the great capitals of the world, of how they are doing great community impact projects in this republic. Yet the truth of the matter is that they are on holiday. They just come here, lounge in five-star hotels, and return back to their country and say, oh, we've just come back from doing a lot of work in Africa, and that kind of, such kind of things, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is important, and I hope that when the Cabinet Secretary eventually sends regulations on the people that will monitor the national determined contributions, and secondly, those that are participating in the carbon markets, Mr. Speaker, they'll set up local enterprises. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is such an important natural resource because the rest of the world doesn't have it. They're craving it. That's why they're investing here as a way of offsetting. You know, Mr. Speaker, in this conversation of the climate change, I think people made commitments in Paris, and people are happy because they thought maybe nobody will be keen enough to follow through the agreements that the rest of the world signed on to those protocols. And subsequently, when they followed and went and did the same in Kyoto, in Japan, Mr. Speaker, they imagined that it will never get to a time such as now, where because of the great ravaging effects, everybody is now saying, we made commitments, let us live through to our commitments. If we are not careful to monitor through these commitments, Mr. Speaker, people will take advantage of us. And that's why I say, because this is such a strategic national asset, these are such regulations that perhaps when it comes to the committees of our colleagues who sit in delegated legislation, you demand even that the companies that will be licensed to monitor this market be 100% local. Let them be fully owned by Kenyans, because it's only a Kenyan that believes in their own country that will want the best for their own nation. At the end of the day, if you're not invested somewhere, and I think it's the same principle that applies, it's very difficult. The reason I cannot run, Mr. Speaker, to be senator of Tana River is because I don't own even a cat there. And if I go there, people will ask you, what do you know about this particular place? Same principle should apply, that if you want to monitor the market here, let it be done. And there is no lack of competent Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, who understand this space that can do it. And therefore, I will be looking forward to subsequently, after the Africa Climate Summit here is done and they send the regulations to Parliament, that we ensure that we lock this space purely for Kenyan markets, Mr. Speaker. Clause 15 of the bill, as I move to conclude, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend Section 35 of the bill to renumber the existing provisions of subsection 1 and introduce an amendment to indicate the sections that does not apply to the entities that have existing carbon projects for a period of a year. I like that it is being monitored year on year, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, if you just get a single approval and leave it, Mr. Speaker, at that, it is very possible that people will do funny things like I have mentioned. They'll, of course, quote and book it on their books. Looks beautiful before their investors that they are offsetting carbon credits in Kenya or whichever part of the world, but then don't follow it subsequently with other investments. You know, after commissioning of a project, Mr. Speaker, if we measure it year on year, as is being provided here, Mr. Speaker, you're able to track progress. That this project at the beginning of the year 2023 was at 50%. Now, in 2024, it is at 65, and it's projected to be concluded on time. That's the importance of clause number 15. Clause 16 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, insert new paragraphs on the regulations of carbon markets, carbon trading, carbon registries, and non-market approaches, Mr. Speaker. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, while carbon trading may not be a standalone solution in combating climate change, I don't want to be a snake oil salesman, Mr. Speaker, where somebody will quote or look at the Hansard a few years down the line and say, Majority Leader, when you're moving this bill in 2023, you made such a rosy presentation about it that we thought this was a silver bullet that will conclude all our climate area challenges, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that this alone will solve that particular problem, but it is such an important milestone. It gives us such momentum, Mr. Speaker, that jointly together with other national efforts and the things that are being done by other brilliant Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, which I'm aware we shall be seeing next week at KICC, Mr. Speaker, we shall be able to come up with better strategies, Mr. Speaker, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which will impact climate change, Mr. Speaker. We are aware, Mr. Speaker, that many Kenyans actually have made huge sacrifices for many years. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact, for example, and many times when we speak about issues of climate change, we celebrate the work of the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai, and her contribution to us as a country. But I know for a fact that besides her, there are many Kenyans, some even not local, and perhaps they challenge my earlier theory on making it 100% local. I know, and I want to celebrate somebody like, Mr. Speaker, Bob Mundro of the Mathare Youth Sports Association, Mr. Speaker. A Canadian, came into the country in 1987, has lived with us, working with communities in Mathare and all over Eastlands in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, using sports, but more importantly, challenging, writing papers, informing various governments, Mr. Speaker, on how to combat climate change. His work for the last 35 years can be felt across not only just here, Mr. Speaker. I know for a fact, despite, unfortunately, and we do not celebrate such good Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, for the work that he did. You know, a few weeks or months ago, he came to my office and told me, unfortunately, Senator, despite all the work that I've done, I have, because of my involvement in football, and you know the kind of politics that comes with football, I have never been granted a Kenyan passport, or even sometimes I struggle even to get my work permit. Somebody who's worked here for 35 years was very instrumental in ensuring that we have the UN offices in Gigiri, UNEP offices in Gigiri, Mr. Speaker, because of their contribution. We need to celebrate that, such Kenyans, people who have gone out of their way to make significant contribution. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I will be, perhaps when we do the parliamentary honors meeting, Mr. Speaker, you know, many times when you do that meeting, we celebrate Kenyans who have made significant contribution. I'll be putting forward his name, the name of Bob Mundro, because of his contribution to the climate space in our country, despite the fact that he's not Kenyan, but has lived here for the last close to 40 years, working with communities in our slums and in different parts of the country, has attracted investment here, to be celebrated during this year's Mashujaa Day. And so many of you, so that we challenge other Kenyans like you, lead this charge, colleague senators. I want to encourage all of us that set up community champions, even in your own local schools, have scouts that work and do work and follow the eminent work of Kenyans that have set the trail in this climate space. Kenyans like Wangare Maathai, Bob Murro that I have just mentioned, Mr. Speaker, so that we have a greater environment and don't just speak about climate, Mr. Speaker, when looking back and saying what should have been changed. We can influence the future, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't just look back and meet, Mr. Speaker, such as the time that we are meeting now in Nairobi, to try and rectify what can go wrong. It is possible to influence the future, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, with those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge honorable senators to support this bill. We move and conclude on it so that next week, when 30 or 40 heads of states that have confirmed their attendance to the Africa Climate Summit come into the country, they appreciate and know that Kenya as a nation is serious on this conversation on climate change. And we maintain our position as a leader of Africa in the climate space, Mr. Speaker. You know that we lead on that particular front, including even in our energy sector, Mr. Speaker, something worth being celebrated about, that we are leading in terms of percentage of clean energy. Of course, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but we have done well as a country. You know, we don't celebrate ourselves many times enough for the good work that we have done, and perhaps we can learn and build on. Mr. Speaker, with these remarks, I beg to move and request Senator Methu, the chairperson on our Land and Environment Committee, to second this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to second this particular motion, Mr. Speaker. And from the onset, I would want to say that I'm quite surprised that I didn't know that Senator Cheriot, the leader of majority, has that in-depth knowledge on matters environment and climate change. I feel very challenged that he has understood the meat and crust of why we actually need to do this particular amendment. And as I second Mr. Speaker, I don't want to say, you know, a lot of issues that I actually need to say have been said by my brother Senator Cheriot. But I want to answer a question that is being asked by most of my colleagues, and it has been a question to all the members of the Lands, Environment and Natural Resources Committee on why we actually need to change this law. Mr. Speaker, all of us keep mentioning, and we base our argument, Article 42 of the Constitution, that every person has a right to clean and healthy, to a clean and healthy environment, Mr. Speaker. But then there is a process to it, Mr. Speaker. And where there have been some naysayers on the climate and environment space, Mr. Speaker, it is then apparent that all of us now agree that challenges that come with global warming are here with us, Mr. Speaker. Everywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, our climate and climatic way of how we are used to has changed drastically, Mr. Speaker, from prolonged droughts, Mr. Speaker, to some places, Mr. Speaker, suffering from very serious droughts and famine, Mr. Speaker. And we, as the people of Kenya and the Kenyan government, Mr. Speaker, when we ratified the Paris Agreement, just as my brother Senator Aaron has mentioned, on December 26, 2016, Mr. Speaker, we set our target carbon emissions to less than 2 degrees Celsius, or less than actually 1.5%, Mr. Speaker. But then, what Senator Cheriot has said, the challenge that we faced, and out of the 13 memoranda that we received as a committee, Mr. Speaker, they are speaking to this particular question: why do we need to do this bill? And the Minister for Environment, because this is a government-sponsored bill, when she appeared before us, that was a very pertinent question. Why do we need this bill? Why do we need to regulate the space about, around carbon trading, Mr. Speaker? There is something that is very clear in the minds of everybody here, that even as we speak about carbon trading, there are 116 organizations that are dealing with carbon credit, Mr. Speaker. And just as Aaron Cheriot has rightfully said, actually the statistics of our share as Kenya in the African market of the carbon credit is 20%. We got 20% of everything that was paid in Africa from this carbon market, Mr. Speaker. But none of the people who are here, or very few of the people who are here, Mr. Speaker, have the clarity of how this money was paid, who was paid, and how they were paid, Mr. Speaker. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we were seated here, and the senator for Machakos was asking the cabinet secretary, now that carbon harvesting is happening in Chulu, I think some place called Chulu in Machakos, Mr. Speaker, what was the space around how this money was paid, Mr. Speaker? The senator for Taita Taveta is here. He was asking how 120 million was paid to a ranch, and they were just, told this is your share of the carbon credit. This is how we traded. This is the much we traded, but they do not know how much was paid. They were just given some blanket whatever. So, when we speak about clarity, Mr. Speaker, you will be surprised today that there is a company that is running in Siaya, and they are doing carbon credit on behalf of the people of Siaya, and not even the leadership of Siaya knows, or even the leadership of Nyandarua, or the members of Parliament who are in this Senate, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, that the highest payment was made to Kwale County, Mr. Speaker. The senator for Kwale is a member of my committee, Mr. Speaker. He does not understand how, or these companies around Shimba Hills traded on behalf of the people of Kwale. How the money that we got as Kenya, the 15 billion, how it was distributed amongst the communities, Mr. Speaker. So, when we speak up to ensuring that we regulate this space about carbon credit, we want to have a clarity of how this trade is happening. Mr. Speaker, again, there's an issue about integrity and transparency, Mr. Speaker. And where government has a responsibility under Article 69 of protecting communities, Mr. Speaker, then they cannot protect communities without a framework. They cannot protect communities without the tools of trade, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, because we are not operating in isolation, Mr. Speaker, we then have to align to international commitments, Mr. Speaker. Because Senator Cheriot has rightly put it, Mr. Speaker. Are we the ones that caused this problem, Mr. Speaker? No. There are other peoples that have greatly contributed to the global warming that we are facing as a country, Mr. Speaker. And 186 countries have committed to the Paris Agreement, Mr. Speaker. But then, are we getting the rightful share of what we are supposed to do so that we ensure we manage this crisis? No, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because we do not have the right framework, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, why we actually need this amendment is to ensure that we engage a broader range of stakeholders. Just as I have said, stakeholders are from different. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we were saying that such a stakeholder has written a memoranda. We are this company that trades this place. Nowhere in the nobody in the ministry knows that they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in government knows they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in the local community knows where they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise is that we need to support Kenya's emission reduction 1.5%, Mr. Speaker. We then have to
pose the question. Senator Matthew, kindly. I proceed to propose the question that the climate change amended a second time. Senator.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Said Mr. Speaker, I support the bill. Mr. Speaker, so that we put our house in order. And because this is a very important bill, an opportunity for us to show true bipartisanship. I would have expected that the leader of majority would have asked the leader of minority to second the bill, in which case then we would have carried the hours together. Then the able senator, the chairman of the Environment Committee, would have come first to make a contribution to the bill. The Speaker, next time the leader of majority calls a special sitting, then consideration must be given to the minority side. The Speaker, having said that, I say that in this bill, we have an opportunity to make a lot of things that have gone wrong, to make them right. The Speaker, I am encouraged that in a few days, the Global South, in fact the entire world, will be coming to Kenya. So Kenya will be hosting the globe to discuss matters environment, to discuss matters climate change. And Mr. Speaker, this presents us as a leadership in this country, then to put our best foot forward as we receive the world to discuss climate change issues. The Speaker, while moving this bill, the majority leader made reference to a distinction between planting trees and growing trees. The Speaker, I think a time has come, and now is, when all of us as leaders then must begin to think of viable initiatives that will culminate in every plant that is planted, every tree that is planted, to grow to maturity. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to say that we want to plant 15 billion trees. It's achievable. But out of those 15 billion trees that we plant, how many will grow to maturity? That is a conversation that we must have as leaders. And the beauty about climate, Mr. Speaker, is that it knows no side. It doesn't know the leadership in the minority or the majority. It affects all of us equally. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to come up with initiatives to grow trees. Mr. Speaker, I heard yesterday, and I've been hearing this story, that El Nino is on the way. The Speaker, we must find a silver lining, even in that extreme weather condition. This is the opportunity now for regions of this country that are known to be rain deficit to move with speed and put in place measures to grow as many trees as possible. And in fact, even as we grow those trees, then we encourage sections of this country, counties in this country, to formally enter in the carbon market. Mr. Speaker, going to the bill, I want to say that this bill has come to us a bit late. We must be our own critics. We must be able to look ourselves in the mirror and tell us the truth. That, Mr. Speaker, we are amending a bill that was passed in 2016. Matters climate move very fast. This actually should be a fourth or a fifth amendment
to the 2016 bill. But Mr. Speaker, because we have it, we have to deal with it as it is. And as we deal with it, Mr. Speaker, we are actually in a race against time in the eyes of the world to tick boxes, because that's what we are doing. Now we have visitors coming in a few days. We have to be seen to belong, so we have to pass this bill. For that reason, we have called a special sitting of the Senate so that we fast-track this bill. Mr. Speaker, going forward, it is only important that as leadership, we are proactive on matters that affect us as a nation. The Speaker, we are, as a country, we are a state party to the Paris Agreement on climate change, and so we must lead ourselves by example, knowing, the Speaker, that we are the headquarters of the United Nations Environment Program. We in the entire world, when on matters environment, the entire world, they bows before Nairobi. The Speaker, for that reason alone, and you know, the Speaker, for us to host UNEP is not an easy thing. Germany, you know, all of us know that Germany has really been pushing to relocate UNEP to Bonn. They have even constructed an entire headquarters. They're just waiting for that day that will get a node to relocate UNEP from Nairobi to Bonn in Germany. The Speaker, because of that, we must be very, very proactive on matters environment as a country. The bill, Mr. Speaker, so that I don't take a lot of time on it, the bill is though late, is timely to the extent that it seeks to mainstream the role and functions of the youth within the council, the Climate Change Council.